Okay, so got a very interesting question. During sprint, who decides what stories to pick between developers? For example, let's assume we pick 20 stories. This sprint is between the team of 6 developers. Do they decide who picks what stories amongst themselves, or do they just burn them in order of the bag items? There isn't one way that a team would action a sprint. There are multiple ways, and let me try to explain you the ideal way, which is like a gold standard and exactly how it might be happening. So I've kind of created a team of 6 developers. Each developer has a very specific skill they are good at, and 20 stories, assuming that each story is a point and the sprint has a 20 story point load, right? So one way is that the team is self-organizing. They are a highly mature team, and you start the sprint by loading these 20 stories in this board, and the team just moves on, and they automatically, for example, this person starts with this story, this person starts with this story, this person maybe picks the next story, assuming that this is the order of priority, and then this person takes this person then moves on to this, and this person jumps on to this, right? And then as this developer frees up, let's say this developer freed up first, right? Hypothetical. So he's gonna probably pick this story. And then this developer freed up. So he's gonna move on and take this story, right? So now this is the ideal way, right? But hardly would you come across a team where they would operate in such a good condition. I mean, assuming that a team can operate like this, there is hardly any requirement to have any supporting role like a Scrum Master or something like that, because the team is self-organizing. But this is the ideal state that everyone aims for. Now, the other way that can happen is that these developers, they only have their good knowledge about their specific skill. So let's say the front end developer, he goes ahead and says, okay, I can just work on front end stories. So he's going to work on this. Then the middleware thinks that he can only work on this. So he's going to work on this, and so on and so forth, right? This is a full stack story. So they start picking on this, and then so on and so forth. So this is the isolated approach that can happen in some cases. This happens a lot, and this happens a lot when a Scrum Master is not very actively trying to see how to improve the team. He's just going through the motions, making sure the team completes the stories, and so on and so forth, right? The third, now again, in the previous approach that I spoke about, the developers are just filling the stories. And when the sprint starts, they just, based on the priority, the front-end developers start going to pick this story, then this story, then this story, and then so on and so forth, the other team members, right? The other, and this is a very big anti-pattern, but usually leadership and a Scrum Master might feel comfortable in this. Right during sprint planning, they would assign stories that, okay, story 1, you are going to do. After you do this story, you will do this story. After you do this story, you will do this story, right? So they have a very clear assignment, and they assign it on Jira or any other tool, and they explicitly call out the stories that they are going to do. Not recommended, happens a lot. Now, going back to the second approach where I said that developers are limited and they have the knowledge to their own skills, so they only pick their stories. Now, if a Scrum Master is actively engaged in that kind of a situation, then he would probably have something like a skill matrix. And he would know that, my team is not a full feature team, because while I have these resources, I have these still dependencies where I can only get a resource to do a thing and not the other. So another approach, and now here the assumption changes, that let's say that you have, instead of 20 story points, you have a capacity of 30 story points, but you only load 20 story points. You want your middleware developer to start trying to build this story and try to learn the skill understand how this works. Similarly, maybe you want your front end to your API developer to look at middleware. You want your front end to start looking at some of the API related stories. So you know that the story which was sized at one maybe may become a 2 point story. A resource who's working on it is not skilled and has a learning curve, but by being able to do something like this, you are able to help your team get more skilled across multiple areas. So instead of becoming I-shaped skills, they start forming T-shaped skills. Now, this does not mean that you shuffle and put every story in such a fashion. Maybe if you want to work practically, then you might still say, okay, these other two stories will still be done by the front end developer, but he's going to touch on this API story and then move forward. And same goes for middleware. So you can play around with this. Now this is under the assumption that you have capacity and you are not pushed against a timeline where you have to make sure that the delivery is hitting that timeline and you don't have any slack. Assuming that you have a timeline, assuming that you have capacity and you have some slack, you can start doing this, and this will help your team grow and get better and have better performance in the future sprints. All right. So that is how, a sprint planning or a sprint might end up, being loaded, or a team might operate during a sprint given these circumstances.